Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome back to A Dose of Sass with your girl Caitlin of Sass and Cellulite. I am not alone today. I am joined by a friend, Sam Previte of Find Food Freedom on the internet. You've probably seen her. I've been a fan of her for a long time. She is a registered dietitian and intuitive eating expert. And I invited her to chat today because if you're new to the podcast, I've been doing a series called Is It Diet Culture, where I kind of break down some of the trends and wellnessy things that I see on the internet and whether or not they are full of garbage, basically. And I've had some requests to talk about intuitive eating. And is it diet culture? Is it a diet? What is it? Is it for me? And I thought, who better to talk about intuitive eating than the expert herself? So, welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I think this will probably be I haven't listened to all of your previous episodes, but one of your first where we can say say proudly and loudly, it is not diet culture.
Right.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
excited to get into it.
Yeah, me too. Before we jump into the topic, fun little question that I like to ask my guests is what is your current hyperfixation snack or meal at the moment?
Ooh, that is a good one. So I eat chicken quesadillas or like
Ooh.
black bean quesadillas multiple times a week. Like if I, that I'll go with that answer because when people ask me like what's one thing you could, eat forever if you could only eat one thing for the rest of your life, it's a quesadilla. Like you could put
Oh
anything
yeah.
in a quesadilla and I will love it. So, I'm gonna
Any
go with
any
quesadilla.
Mexican restaurant, I'm a quesadilla person. Like if there's a chicken quesadilla on the menu, I'm probably gonna have it. So I'm with you with
Yes.
that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I turned my toddler into a quesadilla queen. She's like obsessed and it's her favorite food. And it's like it's so easy and
I love
yummy and
that.
the melty cheese. It's so good. Love
My
that.
current lunch hyperfixation is mac and cheese and hot dogs. Another like childhood
Yum.
classic right now.
I was gonna say that took me right back to childhood. Like I could like
Yeah.
picture myself at like a graduation party or like a summer cookout or something.
Yep. Yep.
Took me right back.
Well, let's jump into intuitive eating. Before we do so, can you share a little bit about you, your credentials, how you landed in the kind of anti-diet space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said before, my name is Sam. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor under Evelyn Tribole, who's one of the co-founders of Intuitive Eating. I am a certified personal trainer, and I'm the founder of Find Food Freedom. So, Find Food Freedom, although we do have a TikTok and an Instagram, we are also a virtual private practice made up of a team of oh gosh, I want to say it's 14 or 15. I don't even know now. This is bad. I need to count. But at least 14 registered dietitians, and we provide virtual one-on-one counseling to people all over the United States. We accept health insurance, and our counselors, every single one of my providers is weight inclusive. So our goal is to help people make peace with food and their body and genuinely improve their health physically, mentally, emotionally, and whatever that means for them. So that's a little bit about Find Food Freedom, but in the very abbreviated story, no, I have not always been in the anti-diet space. I was a very, very diet culture-y dietitian, as unfortunately a lot of dietitians are, because that's how we're classically trained. The coursework and even into the credentialing of getting my RD credential, a lot of that education was very fat phobic, was very weight centric. And it wasn't until later, like when I was practicing as a dietitian, that I was exposed to specifically eating disorder dietitians and the work that they were doing. This is back when like being on Instagram wasn't like a thing. And I
Mm.
had a few colleagues that were sharing about what they were doing in the eating disorder space and shared about the intuitive eating book. And I was like, what is this all about? Um, and then I read the book. I remember calling my colleague and asking her all these questions. And I was like, what? Like, this is mind blowing. And I like, once you learn it, you can't unlearn it. And it took a really, really long time. It took many years of unlearning a lot of cognitive dissonance of like, can I actually do this? Can I build a business around this? Because everybody wants weight loss. That's what I thought. That's what we're told as dietitians, that weight loss is our party trick. When you say to someone you're a dietitian, they're like, how do I lose weight? So I was really scared to make the jump into the weight inclusive intuitive eating space, but I'm so glad that I did because it's some of the most rewarding work. It's some of the most challenging work, but it is life-changing for the people that we work with.
So aside from discovering intuitive eating as a dietitian and choosing to like put that into practice, was it applicable to your own like personal relationship with food and body at the time?
Great question. So they didn't necessarily work like completely parallel, but yes, I was very disordered in college. I would say was my most disordered time. I went to Penn State, which I would say is a party school, but like most schools are party schools, I believe. So I went into college like seeking to find this magic answer for weight loss because I hated my body. I had poor body image. So yeah, I sought out this dietetic program in college very disordered. And then once I found intuitive eating, at that point, I had kind of stopped dieting. I wasn't doing intuitive eating, but I kind of got to that like fuck it mentality where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. But I didn't really know that intuitive eating existed. So I wasn't necessarily dieting when I found intuitive eating, but I wouldn't say that I had found complete freedom with food or that I necessarily had any type of like body neutrality or
Sure.
acceptance either at that point.
Yeah. I think a lot of folks sometimes stumble across intuitive eating from that place of like, I definitely don't want to diet anymore, but I don't really know what else to do. So it's kind of
Yep.
like, oh, well, most of us, if you've ever struggled with disordered eating, eating disorder, or pursuing intuitive eating, probably have some sort of all or nothing mentality. So you go from like, I'm going to follow the rules 100% to no rules, yay. And then like, how do you balance back into the middle is the
Yes.
hardest part. And I think that's where kind of a lot of the misconception about intuitive eating on the internet can be, because it's like, oh, you hear the word intuitive eating or you hear a really basic definition of it, and it sounds like eating anything you want all the time forever and ever, amen. And like, sure, yes, kind of, but not really also. And so they're like, well, I can't possibly do that or else I'll eat everything in sight. And
Yep.
that's really not what it is. So, for those who may not be familiar with intuitive eating, could you break us down just a little definition of what it is?
If we look at a simple definition, intuitive eating is a self-care eating framework and it pulls in instinct, emotion, and rational thought. Like I mentioned earlier, it was created by two dietitians, but it was created back in 1995. So I love to tell people that because on TikTok, a lot of people have found intuitive eating there and they think like, oh, this is new. Like this is a new thing. And it's like, no, this has been around for a very long time. There's over 170 studies on it. There's also a validated assessment scale. So when you're working with a intuitive eating professional, we are tracking progress. Now, tracking progress with intuitive eating looks very different than diet culture because we do not use weight as a measure of progress. We do not use size of the body or calorie counts or any of those tangible numbers that pulls in with dieting. And so when you're on an intuitive eating journey, those there are 10 defined principles that we work through, but it's not, again, it's hard when you're coming from diet culture because people are like, oh, I just follow these 10 things and then I'm good to go. But, these principles are not a one size fits all, or like you don't even have to go through them 1 through 10. It's really addressing them and recognizing that they're going to help you cultivate attunement in your body. They're going to help you be able to listen to the physical sensations in your body. They're going to help you build trust again with your body. And I say again because for those listening, we didn't always distrust our body. This was taught somewhere along the lines of diet culture. And really, intuitive eating helps remove the disruptors and the obstacles that are external. So when we think about diet culture tells us to follow a calorie count, a meal plan, portion sizes, food rules, you name it, things that are external from our body. So with intuitive eating, we learn how to turn inward, we build introspective awareness, and we really get to, like I said, listen to our bodies again, which sounds so simple. But then again, when you're coming from dieting for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it's really hard. It's really difficult.
Yeah, the concept of listening to your body can be completely foreign, or it comes out in the way of like, if I listen to my body, I would eat cake for every meal. And
Yes.
that's because of like, how you've been conditioned. And I think one of the pivotal things for me, that like a light bulb moment for me when I was learning about that body trust, and that it was something that we used to have. Like babies, for example, know when they're hungry and when they're full and what they want, and they might not be able to communicate it as well as we can as adults, but that was something for me that I was like, oh yeah, duh. Like I look at my nieces and nephews, even who are like 5, 7, and 9. They know what they want. They know like what sounds good. And if we let them like listen to their bodies, they are going to ask for vegetables. They are going to ask for fruits. They're not just going to ask for candy every single meal of the day. And at some point, that gets conditioned out of us because of diet culture, surprise. And relearning that is really hard, but that's what it's all about.
Yes. And one thing you had said earlier that I wanted to come back to, which is probably like the number one myth, right, that we hear on social media about intuitive eating is that it's just eat whatever you want, right? And then I think you had even said it, the number one fear that people come right back with is like, but if I can eat whatever I want, I'm only going to eat cake, cookies, ice cream, pasta,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that thing
Mm-hmm.
is. And I want to validate for people, it's normal to have that fear. But first, all foods fit with intuitive eating, and that eating whatever you want mentality, is it true? Yes, right? Because with principle number 3, we have make peace with food, which is understanding that we have unconditional permission to eat. Now, having unconditional permission to eat is very different than saying yes to food all the time. And that's where that messaging gets so misconstrued, is people think that food freedom or intuitive eating is always saying yes to food. But it makes sense why we think that, because when we come from dieting, if we are dieting, we're following those really strict rules. We're black and white, right? We're on or off the diet. And when we come off of the diet, that's when we're in that like F it mentality where we're eating all of the food. And so that's when that kind of triggers that fear of, see, I have to be on a diet or I have to be following rules, because if I'm not, I'm out of control. But we know through research that restriction is the number one indicator of binging. And binging and overconsumption will always occur if restriction is present. Now, when I say restriction, a lot of times that gets followed up with, but Sam, I'm not restricting. I'm eating the cake, the pizza, the cookies. I'm eating those things and I still feel out of control. And to that, obviously everybody's different, but we'll dig deeper and we'll look at, okay, are you sure you might be physically eating the pizza, but when you're eating the pizza, is that met with the mental restriction of the dialogue saying, I shouldn't be eating this. I'm such a bad person. I should be eating something healthier. I can't believe I'm eating this. Because if you are mentally restricting and berating yourself that way in your head, that will create urgency. That creates guilt and shame with food. So, that's a really big part of that kind of eating that all foods fit mentality. And then to something else I'll mention and then I'll take a breath, but is the piece of food habituation with intuitive eating, because that fear of, but I'll never stop eating X, right? Let's say pizza for the example. My favorite study that is looked at in intuitive eating is actually with college students in pizza. And they were told they were going to be a part of this kind of study group, and that they were going to get free unlimited pizza if they came to this group. So they were like, yes, pizza, amazing. And what do you think happened by like a few days in? They didn't want to look at pizza again because
Right.
they had unlimited pizza. And so, do we want people to not look at pizza ever again? No, that is not the goal. But the more exposure we have to food, the more we believe truly that we're allowed to eat it, then we get to tap into, what do I actually want? And that's where it's so hard, because, and I understand it because I used to be there. It's so hard to believe that you would want anything other than pizza for this example. But this comes back to, if you are restricting something, it is probably going to be the only thing you can think about until you allow yourself to eat it. And we know that food habituation is a thing. If anybody has dieted that's listening to this, think about foods that you have food habituated with dieting. So think about grilled chicken, salad, brown rice. Like you look at those maybe and you're like, oh, great. Like we've ate them so many times. They're like big whoop. So those have been exposed to so many times that it's like, whatever. So we can do that same thing with the foods that we've restricted. But again, the goal is not to make things not attractive or not yummy, but just to make them less stressful and create less urgency to consume them.
Totally. And to go off of that example, I'll share a personal one for me. This was like crazy when I first noticed this happening. One food for me that I felt like I was always out of control around was Cool Ranch Doritos.
Okay.
Love them. And I would eat that. I would eat the whole bag at all times. If I had them, it's this, I
Yeah.
have to have them now or I'm never going to have them again. And I
Yes.
remember when I first started doing intuitive eating and I bought myself a bag and probably for a few weeks, maybe even months, I would still eat a majority of the bag. And then
Yep.
I'd go to the store and I'd get some more and it was something I ate regularly. And then at a certain point, and I can't even tell you when because it's going to be different for everybody. At a certain point, I was eating them and I remembered I have more, first of all. If I wanted more, I could go to the store. I don't need to finish them right now. And like just those simple thoughts, I was like, oh, I guess I'm kind of full. Or like, I guess I'll have some more later. Or just some kind of like interruption in the thoughts
Yep.
to where I set them down. And now, 4 or 5 years later, I've had a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos in my pantry for weeks and they are
Yep.
unopened, untouched. And like 2020, 2019 me would be like, that's crazy. How can you possibly, why aren't you eating them? Someone's going
Yeah.
to take them away. Right. Like, and that just goes to show like, one, it takes time, and two, it will stop. And so if you're thinking to yourself, maybe you've already started intuitive eating and you're listening to this and you're like, does it get better? When am I going to stop wanting the pizza, the Doritos, the whatever? Like it does. Yeah, it's a really freeing moment to realize, oh, this isn't like my last supper. And like
Yes.
we've said, it's not a I'm going to eat everything because I can. You get to this point where you're like, yeah, I can, except I don't want to. Like, and
Yes.
that's crazy. That's a
Yes.
crazy point to get to.
Thank you for sharing that personal story. That's such a great example, and that's such a common thing we see as intuitive eating counselors is like we'll get messages from clients being like, "What kind of voodoo are you doing on me?" Because, for example, I have a client, very similar story, but like with Oreos, like she would
Uh-huh.
always eat the entire container, and she's like, "I put them back because I don't want them." And then she's texting me like or messaging me in our portal like, "Am I dieting?" And I'm like, "No, it's okay, right? To not want to finish something. What is your intention? Is your intention because you're
Mhm.
restricting yourself or because you simply do not want them right now and know that you have access to them?" And I love that you brought that up. I think that's a really important point of the expectations we have with intuitive eating because I think people want so badly to snap their fingers and be like, okay, I can have this whenever I want, so then I should stop eating it. But what you so beautifully illustrated with the Cool Ranch Doritos is like you did eat the entire bag, whoever, who knows how many times, but multiple, multiple, multiple times because you had to prove to yourself that you are not restricting yourself anymore,
Mhm.
that you are allowed to have these. And a big part of what we do too is, and probably where you got to that point, is you start to get really present in your body of like, does this feel physically pleasant when I
Right.
do this? And if the answer is no, it's not to guilt or shame ourselves. We're still allowed, again, that unconditional permission to eat. It's just starting to get mindful and again, tapping into that introspective awareness. But I think people so often expect a quick flip of a switch that I'm not going to crave these things. But if we have restricted ourselves for 20 years, it's going to take a long time to trust that we're not going back to dieting because
Yeah.
dieting often is tied to our identity. It's our purpose. It's if we've been chasing a smaller body for an extended period of time, it's really difficult. It's not impossible, but it's really difficult to overcome in the beginning.
Totally. I think it's also another difficult part of it and thing that takes time that you have to like prepare yourself for is it's not so much battling your brain of I can have this, it's okay to eat, it's whatever. It's it kind of goes into a battle of, am I listening to my body, or is it shame coming in? Is there guilt
Hmm.
here, or am I just full? Like it gets to a
Yeah.
point where you're like trying to delineate your own thoughts of,
Yes.
because there are so many, if you've been in diet culture for years and years and years, they just live rent free in your brain. And it's about like learning those, unlearning some thoughts and relearning those thoughts and replacing them with like, oh, no, it's not because I didn't stop eating the Doritos because, oh no, suddenly I realized I shouldn't be having them. Like, I just don't want them anymore. And you have to check, do I really think that?
Yes. And then even us talking about it, like for those listening, it's important to like be explicitly clear that like the goal is not to eat less Cool Ranch Doritos, right?
Right.
Like the goal is to be able to listen to your body. And
Right.
maybe there's still gonna, not maybe, probably there's gonna be a day where you want a bunch of Cool Ranch Doritos,
Yeah.
and that's okay too. And so it comes back to what we were talking about earlier is like that body trust and listening to your body again, which again sounds like such a simple thing to say, but is very difficult to do.
Yeah. I think I've seen, this is another place that gets misconstrued on the internet, is people talk about intuitive eating for weight loss, and they talk about what I eat in a day as an intuitive
Oh,
eater. I know, big sigh. And they do it as this kind of, and we talk about set point weight, right? Set point
mhm.
weight theory when it comes to intuitive eating and listen to your body and all that kind of stuff. And people think like, once I figure out intuitive eating, then I can lose weight, then I can whatever. Like, making peace with food still equates to eating as little food as possible and losing weight and being healthy. Like
Yes.
that's where it gets messy online.
100%. I remember when I was newer into like the intuitive eating realm of things as a counselor. I remember I interviewed Evelyn Tribbley on our podcast, and she was like, if you want to be confused about intuitive eating, go look up hashtag intuitive eating on Instagram. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, you know, as a very big warning right now, like if anyone is saying the words intuitive eating and weight loss together, that is absolutely unethical. It is, and it's just straight up wrong. Like the intention behind intuitive eating has nothing to do with intentional weight loss. And anyone that's promoting that, that is extremely harmful. So, for those listening to this, if you're really trying to walk an intuitive eating journey, look at those bios on Instagram. If intuitive eating and weight loss are in that Instagram bio, just click unfollow, block, remove because that's extremely harmful.
Absolutely. How do you feel about folks who share what I eat in a day as an intuitive eater?
It's definitely a controversial thing, I believe, in our profession. And I think, you know, people might have a different opinion than me on this, which is, of course, that's an opinion. I do think they're not all created equal, and there are some that can be beneficial. So, you know, the what I eat in a day videos that have calorie counts, absolutely not. No, thank you. Like, terrible. The ones that also like only show nutrient dense foods and vegetables and green juices, and someone's like not eating for the first 4 hours of the day. No, thank you.
Right.
Not realistic. I think when it comes down to it, like there are some creators I think that are doing it really well. One, a good friend of mine, Victoria Garrick Brown, maybe she has done a few of like a full day, but it's more so she's like, here's how I choose my lunch as an intuitive eater, and she'll kind
Totally.
of showcase like the texture she's looking for, the food she has on hand, how much time she has, you know, all those kind of things. I think that's really helpful for people to see. And then another creator, Brittany Lancaster, is someone who on TikTok I've interviewed before, and she was recovering from an eating disorder and just showing again what she eats in a day as someone who's recovering from an eating disorder. Now, I also think some of the a disclaimer that should be said is if you are recovering from an eating disorder or in the depths of chronic dieting and you find yourself comparing yourself to what someone else is eating, then maybe that content is not right for you right now, and that's okay. And that's the hard thing about social media, right? What might be helpful to someone else of like, oh my gosh, she ate a bagel in the morning and she had like a sub roll at lunch with her sandwich. Like I haven't seen someone eat those two things and allow themselves to do that, like that's incredible. That gives me the permission that I needed. Like that can be really helpful. But to someone else, they might be looking at it as, oh, well, I ate more than her and I shouldn't be eating that much. And so I think some of this comes with a huge disclaimer of like being able to recognize, does the content feel helpful to you or does it feel harmful to you? And I think that that goes for any type of content, not just what I eat in a day videos.
Totally. I tell people all the time that like muting and blocking people doesn't have to have anything to do with the person. Like their
Of
content can
course.
be perfectly fine for somebody else. Like if it triggers you in some way, if it bothers you in some way, you notice feelings and thoughts that are coming up when you're consuming it. It's 100% has to do with you, and like doesn't it doesn't mean they're bad, they're wrong, they're whatever. Like you're in control of your own social media and you have the power to curate your feed. I think for me, when it comes to what I eat in a day, is for the most part, I don't consume them. I love Victoria
Yeah.
and I think hers are helpful. I think as a content creator, the thought of even sharing a what I eat in a day as an intuitive eater, like setting up the camera and filming it, I already have this pressure in my brain to like, let's make it a good day, quote unquote. Let's make sure I have a good hearty breakfast because that's what I tell my people online to do. Like, let's make sure I eat enough protein and have enough snacks. And if I'm really intuitive eating, then maybe I'll not finish a snack, right? There's this like inherent pressure because of the fact that it's going to be consumed online that I like builds up in my brain. And that's why I don't share like what I eat in a day as an intuitive eater, because it's going to cause too much internal turmoil for me. Just the pressure of internet.
Totally. I don't do them either because for me, I know I've like tried and then I'm like, whoops, like ate a cookie or ate a handful of pretzels like after, you know what I mean? Like my
Totally.
brain, I don't know if it's like my ADHD, but I can't do it takes too much planning when I just like eat so subconsciously a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, it's too much for me. So I don't really consume it either. So
Yeah.
except for
Yeah.
the few creators I like that do them, but yeah, I'm with you. And again, I think it comes down to the person of like, is this helpful for me or is this harmful for me? And that's going to be different for everyone.
Totally. So, something that I learned as I was exiting diet culture and exploring intuitive eating and healing my relationship with food, all of that was talking about labeling yourself as a
Mhm.
specific type of eater. So, people that are like, oh, I'm a keto eater, I'm a clean eater, I'm a whatever, like that is an extra level of restriction in itself. Do you think that labeling yourself as an intuitive eater can cause that same kind of pressure?
It's a really, really good point or a good question. Well, I always say that intuitive eating would just be eating if diet culture didn't exist. So to me, if someone's calling themselves an intuitive eater, to me, that says you're looking at every eating experience as an opportunity to learn. It does not mean you're never going to overeat again. It does not mean you're never going to feel uncomfortable from food. It does not mean you're going to stop all of your meals halfway through and leave a bite. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, no. But again, coming back to each and every person is different. If you're coming from diet culture where you were the clean eater or the keto warrior or the Whole 30 princess or whatever the people are saying these days, if you're going to label yourself an intuitive eater, you have to give yourself the grace that honestly, that doesn't mean anything. It just means you're eating food.
Right.
Like, if really simply put, like an intuitive eater to me just means you're eating food, period, point blank.
Right.
So, but if you, yeah, if there's like a pressure that comes along with this, like how you said, like with the, the what I eat in a day videos, like if there's any pressure to film those and that was going to change how you're eating, you're like, nope, not good. So if calling yourself an intuitive eater feels like too much pressure, then just say I'm eating food.
Right.
Because intuitive eating does not look the same from one person to the next.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's what's tricky about it too. And I talk a lot about how the internet doesn't like nuance, it doesn't like the
Oh
middle
no.
ground, it really likes black and white extremes.
Yep.
And so, of course, you're only ever going to see like intuitive eating for weight loss as one extreme and
Yep.
intuitive eating like the perfect other end.
Yep.
And like you said, if diet culture didn't exist, it really would just be normal eating. But like
Yep.
that's not interesting to the internet. So someone people always have to like add a little spin to it. um,
Always.
Yeah. I think another misconception is they hear these 10 principles of intuitive eating and they think, like, okay, great, 10 rules. I can follow 10 rules.
Yep.
And my therapist years ago was the first one who introduced me to it. And I was going through the book and I got to a session with her and I was like, she's like, so how's it going? Like, what are you thinking? I'm like, where are the rules? Where is the list of foods to eat and not eat? Like, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop of like, and then I get halfway through and I'm like, oh, it's mindset stuff. Got it, got it, got it. Okay, that's a lot harder. Dang it, got to start over. But like people think and can turn it into a diet by thinking, oh, okay, honoring your hunger, listening to your fullness, those are rules. Like, and that's got to look a certain way because so and so online makes it look a certain way. And they skip right over the first reject the diet mentality and just go, okay, what are the rest of the rules? And I think that's one of the ways it can get really muddied on online.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense, if you come from dieting where all you've ever done is follow rules, like then you come over to intuitive eating and you're like, well, what the fuck do I do? Like, is someone going to tell me what to eat? And I think about it as like I love to use the analogy of when we're dieting. Imagine we're speaking Spanish. So if you've dieted for 20 years, you've spoke Spanish for 20 years. And then let's pretend intuitive eating is German. So then the next day you're like, all right, I'm on an intuitive eating journey. It's like, okay, now you're speaking German. And you're like, what? Like I've been speaking Spanish for 20 years. It's really, really hard because it's not just not dieting, although that is a part of the process. That's like 0.00001% of the process. It's changing every single like belief system that's ever been baked inside of you. And that takes a really long time to uproot and to unlearn and to work through.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's going to take, like we've said, it's going to take a really long time
Yeah.
to get back to quote unquote normal eating. Like, this is not an overnight process. This is not
Yeah.
a 6 week challenge. This is not a year commitment. Like, this is hopefully how you like want to approach the rest of your life. Like, if you want to
Yeah.
eat normally, welcome to the rest of your life. And it will be a battle unlearning everything that you've ever known.
Yeah, and I think, not to scare people, but I think it goes back to like that level setting expectations of what the journey is and isn't and what it's gonna look like. Um, but for those who are in that ambivalent stage of like, do I want to do this? It's, looking at, okay, how many years have you dieted for, or have you been following food rules for? And has it gotten you what it's promised you long term? And if the answer is no, then why are we continuing to do it? And not to guilt ourselves or shame ourselves because dieting can serve a purpose for people for a really long time. It can act as a coping mechanism. It can get you through stressful stuff. Not to say that it's helpful, but it is serving a purpose. And so understanding why we keep going back to it and just knowing that it is never too late to walk away from it. We've had clients, our eldest client was 79 when he started working with us. We have clients in all walks of life. And one thing, no matter how old or young they are, we usually hear from them once they're like really, in their sessions is like, I wish I knew about this earlier. I wish I started this work earlier because it allows you to be present in your life and think about more important things than calories, macros, portions, etc.
So, mom, as a dietitian, as an intuitive eater, aka normal eater, how are you approaching food with your kids in a way that like sets them up for success?
Great question. It's so interesting because sometimes when I go back and think about the advice that I gave to parents before I became a parent, I cringe and cringe. I think cringing is a good thing though because it shows like signs of growth. And we don't know what we don't know, and when we know better, we do better. But I think when I became a parent, I just thought that like feeding will be easy, and it's not. It's really not. And I have I have two girls. I have one that's 9 months, and I have a 2.5-year-old. And if we look at specifically the toddler, right, because she's eating like all solids at this point, clearly. Yeah, it's you think like, oh, I'm a dietitian. I know what to do, or I should know what to do. But one thing for me specifically, I do not work in pediatrics. Like I do not work with kids. I do not work with teens. I personally work with adults as clients. So adults and children are very different. Um, and I did just think like, oh, kids will be intuitive eaters. Like that's what I thought. And to an extent they are. But as a parent, it is your job to provide structure to your child, and to give them, to offer the food. It is their job to eat the food, right? We cannot force them to choose, swallow, eat. So I think for me, there's two places I'll go with this and then kind of see where you want to go from here.
Sure.
Anytime I work with a parent that comes to me, and we work with a ton of parents that are like, I don't want to pass on my disordered eating or my negative body image to my child. What do I do? The first thing I'll say to them is work on your own relationship with food and body first. Before you're trying to navigate this with your child, before you're trying to apply things to your child, you cannot pour from an empty cup. And how you talk about food, how you talk about your body, how you consume food, what you shop for, like all of that bleeds over into your child's relationship with food and body. So if you start with yourself first, that's going to have the biggest impact on your child. So if you're already doing that or you're even thinking about doing that, you're leaps and bounds ahead, and that is incredible. Now, when it comes to like day-to-day stuff, where I think you can make the most impact as a parent is the verbiage that we use around food. Um, it's wild to me, like what my 2.5, like how she's already communicating and how many conversations we have and how much she's soaking in. And so how we talk about food in our bodies is so, so important. And this is actually a story I'll tell you, that I've never told anywhere because it literally happened yesterday, is out of nowhere. I think we have like one of those aura frames that's like a digital
Mm-hmm.
frame, that the pictures go. So my daughter, she's always seeing it in our kitchen. And one of the pictures popped up of me being pregnant, with her sister. And so she was like, Mama's belly. And she goes, I want to see your belly. And I was like, right now? And I was like, okay. And so I went over to her and I like picked my shirt up, and she was like, big belly. And I was like, yeah, my belly is big. And I was like, and it's squishy. And she was like, I want to squish your belly. And so she was like, and I had a C-section, 9 months ago, and I'm postpartum belly and all of the things. I do want to also say as a disclaimer, like I do reside in a straight size body, so I recognize my privilege here in this story. But so she's squishing my belly and she kisses my belly. And I'm like, this is such an amazing moment for like life. But I'm like, oh, I love when you kiss my belly. I love my belly so much. I love your belly. And we have like a book that we read about bellies and all this stuff. And I was just thinking about how different that moment could have been if I was at war with my body.
Mm,
Right. And I think about myself in my 20s or like before I had made peace with my body. And that's not to say that I don't have hard body image days or negative thoughts, etc. Like we said, it's a lifelong journey. But that is such a perfect example of I could have gotten snappy. I could have gotten short. I could have said, no, you can't touch mommy's belly. Or if she said, like, I love your belly. And I was like, well, I don't love my belly. Need to lose weight. Or, you know what I mean?
right,
Like,
right.
so I just was thinking about all the ways this could have gone differently. And this is obviously about body, is not food, but it parallels so much, right? How we speak about food, the morality associated with food, if we call something good and bad, and oh, you can't have this until you eat this, and creating this like reward system with food. It's so important to recognize our language. And that goes back to what I said before. Working on your own relationship with food and body is going to naturally impact your child's in immense ways.
Absolutely. And I'm not a parent yet, so I'm only speaking from aunt experience, but the more we like speak about bodies and food in a neutral way, like
100%.
they will pick up on that.
100%.
A slightly different question, because I'm just thinking about food being neutral. How do you feel about the like food is fuel community on the internet? Like, and how
Yeah.
does that kind of I'm like in the is it diet culture vein, can it be, I guess, like, can it go hand in hand with intuitive eating, or is it a little too extreme? Or just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, saying food is fuel is an accurate statement, right? Like
Mhm.
it is fuel. It is our number one source of energy. Calories is just another word for energy, right? A measure of energy. So that is a factual statement. But food is also holidays. It's precious memories. It's traditions. It's connection with friends. It's traveling and experiencing culture. Like it is so many things other than fuel. And so I think if there are certain accounts or videos you're thinking about where people are like, food is fuel and this much goes in and da, like it's like, okay, that's we're starting to straddle that diet culture line. But thinking from like the parental lens, how we speak about food and how we educate our children in ways that are is fun and and using that terminology can be helpful. So like toddlers, I swear I saw a TikTok video that was so funny. It was like a pediatrician slash grandma. She was talking about like someone asked her a question like, what if my toddler doesn't eat? Like, is it okay? And the comment section on TikTok always like has me howling. People were like, someone wrote like, I'm pretty sure my toddler's solar powered. Someone was like, my toddler's like runs off of like a goldfish in a gust of wind, or like, and like toddlers like there's days they will eat and there's days like they will not eat. Like, and not like a full day of not eating, but like you're like, how the hell are they not eating? And so going back to this idea of like we can't control their food. And so, like, when my daughter goes through those little phases or stages, it's not like sitting them down and saying, like, you have to eat, like, eat your food. Like, that does nothing but create resistance. But to, bring into that conversation, hey, like, we're going to go to the park later and we want to have a lot of energy. And remember that, like, if we're eating a snack, I'm making this up, like, these pretzels and cheese stick are going to give you a lot of energy so we can go play at the park later. Like, if she doesn't eat, so be it. But like bringing in that conversation that food can give our body energy is a fun thing. Um, but with the huge disclaimer, like I said, food is so much more than energy.
Absolutely.
And that needs to be a part of the conversation too.
I think even sometimes I will like parent my own self in having those same conversations of like, if diet culture is feeling strong that day and I'm thinking to myself, hey, it's a little past lunch, I'm a little bit hungry, or I could take a nap, it's like, or you're going to feel a lot worse if you don't have food right now. And like
Yep.
talking to myself as if I'm a kid, hey, you're going to a dance class later, you're going to need a snack, you're going to need some energy, you're going to whatever. And like approaching it from that is so much easier than like, I don't know, just muscling through the diet culture thoughts. Yeah, I do a lot of like gentle parenting of my own self, especially as a picky eater. It's one of my least favorite traits of myself is picky eating because it makes eating harder.
Yeah.
I do like I make snack boxes for myself or adult Lunchables and things like that that make eating easier. And like that being the goal, not like, oh, I have a snack box of fruit and veggies. Yay, now I'm eating my fruits and veggies. I'm being a good person. It's like, oh, now I'm eating.
Yeah.
Yay. Like end of
Ab
story.
absolutely. And again, it comes back to like, what is your intention behind it? And it's to fuel yourself, to get nourishment in, to make sure you have energy for your dance class. Um, and yeah, when people like start to prep food for themselves or pack things, like, am I dieting again? And I'm like, are you telling yourself that that's the only food that you're allowed to eat? And they're like, no. And it's like, oh, okay, this is actually a form of self-care. Like
Right.
going an extra step and being like, oh, this will help me nourish my body. It's a positive thing for
Totally.
sure.
Yeah. I think this has been super helpful for folks who want to learn more about you and the Food Freedom Program. Where can they find you online?
Yeah, the probably the easiest place would be Instagram. So our Instagram is at fine.food.freedom, or TikTok, it's Fine Food Freedom, no dots. And on both of those, you'll see a link that you can check your insurance benefits. So they can go to bit.ly /FFF insurance, or you can find that link on either of our social media pages. We do the benefit check live there. You just put in your state that you live. We're licensed in 22 states, as well as your insurance provider. And most people have coverage and pay $0 and have no idea that they even have these benefits. So I really encourage people to get their benefits checked so they can get that professional support.
I wish I had known that when I first started. I went through a binge eating recovery program and it was not covered by my insurance,
Yep.
or at least I didn't even check.
Yeah.
And I paid a lot of money. So that's awesome that you guys have that. Any final thoughts, pieces of advice for folks who want to get into intuitive eating and don't know where to start?
Oh, that's a great question. Like I said, I think just finding professionals who you trust. And it doesn't even have to be professionals because, for example, you are not necessarily a dietitian or a certified
Right.
intuitive eating counselor. And I think that's important too, is finding people that you resonate with their content in a way that feels aligned and helpful for you. Something I forgot to mention previously is we have two podcasts. We have the Find Food Freedom podcast, which we go very deep into intuitive eating process and how to make it applicable for you, as well as the What the Actual Fork podcast. But I would say, if I'm trying to simplify it, turn inward and get professional support.
Totally. Yeah, that's so great. Thank you so much, Sam, for joining me today, answering all the burning questions about intuitive eating, clearing up the myths and misconceptions we see online. Intuitive eating is not diet culture. It can be the way sometimes people talk about it on the internet, but inherently it's not. And if diet culture didn't exist, it would be normal eating, like you said. So
Yes.
thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That was such a great conversation with Sam. I'm so glad I had her. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. If you have more questions about intuitive eating, I'm sure shoot me a DM, shoot her a DM, follow her on social media. I'll talk to you soon.